Hal, wait. You can't just leave. Please, don't go!
It's over, Kang.
Halle, please.
The stocks are crashing! It was all because of her life story.
Halle.
I kept count. Not in a journal he could discover. Not in a note on my phone he could scroll through while I slept. I kept the number in the place women like me learn to store the things we are expected to survive, quietly folded small, pressed flat, hidden behind the ribs where pain cannot embarrass anyone important. 99. That was the number sitting inside my chest on the night everything changed. 99 times I had watched my husband, Kang Do-hyun, choose his empire, his mother, his pride, his former fiancée, or simply his own comfort over me. And 99 times, I opened my arms again and called it love. I used to think that made me strong. I used to believe a woman who could forgive that much must have a heart the size of a cathedral. I know better now. A woman who forgives that many times has usually run out of other places to put her pain. My name is Halle Ashcroft. For 6 years, I wore the name Halle Kang like a beautiful coat tailored for someone else. It looked expensive in photographs. It opened doors. It made strangers bow slightly when I entered rooms. But it never truly belonged to me. Before I married Do-hyun, I was a crisis strategist the woman companies called when one headline could wipe hundreds of millions from their value before breakfast. After I married him, his family told people I did something in communications. They thought that was all I was. A quiet wife. A foreign wife. A black woman lucky enough to have been selected by one of Seoul's most feared business families. What none of them understood was that for 4 years, under a name they had never connected to mine, I had been the single most valuable asset the Kang Group possessed. They called that asset the Ghost. The Ghost appeared whenever the empire was about to collapse. The Ghost silenced scandals, prevented investigations, calmed shareholders, redirected journalists, repaired broken alliances, and disappeared before anyone could ask who had saved them. The board thought the Ghost was a secretive European consultancy. Do-hyun's father thought the Ghost was a team of retired intelligence officers. Yoo Jin-baek, the woman my mother-in-law had always believed should have married my husband, once joked that the Ghost was probably an old man hiding behind a dozen assistants. No one imagined the Ghost was the woman they seated at the far end of the dinner table. No one imagined she slept down the hall. And no one imagined what would happen when she finally stopped answering the phone. This is the story of how I disappeared, and how an empire that thought it did not need me learned, in 11 brutal days, exactly how wrong it was. But before I tell you about the 100th betrayal, you need to understand what 99 forgivenesses look like from the inside. Because women rarely leave over one moment. We leave when one final moment forces us to see the shape of all the others. I met Do-hyun the way you meet a storm, not gradually, but all at once. I was 26, working late nights at a crisis communications firm that handled problems wealthy men preferred to call misunderstandings. My job was to write apologies for executives who were not sorry, protect companies that had mistaken secrecy for strategy, and prevent careless people from setting fire to institutions thousands of employees depended on. One November evening, the Kang Group arrived at our office 3 hours away from a headline that would have erased nearly $400 million from its market value. A customs official in Busan had discovered irregularities in a pharmaceutical shipment connected to one of the family's subsidiaries. A reporter already had documents. 2 board members were blaming each other. Legal counsel was arguing over language while the communications director had locked himself in a bathroom. And in the center of the panic stood Kang Do-hyun. Charcoal suit, perfect posture, completely still. He did not look frightened. He looked like a man furious that fear had entered the room without his permission. I did not recognize him. That mattered later, because most people changed the instant they heard the name Kang. Their voices softened, their shoulders shifted. They began performing respect before the family had earned it. I simply asked him for the documents. "Which ones?" he said. "All of them." His lawyer objected. I looked at the lawyer and said, "You can protect your pride, or I can protect your company. Pick one quickly." Do-hyun stared at me. Then he handed over the files. I found the problem within 40 minutes. The violation itself was serious, but survivable. The real danger was that 3 departments had produced 3 conflicting explanations. If the reporter compared them, the story would become deception instead of negligence. I built a response before midnight. Voluntary disclosure. Immediate suspension of the regional director. Independent audit. Direct outreach to the customs authority before the reporter could frame the family as evasive. By 1:30 in the morning, the journalist's exclusive had become a short article about a company responding aggressively to internal compliance concerns. The stock barely moved the next day. I packed my laptop at 2 in the morning and found Do-hyun still standing near the conference room window. "You did not have to stay," I told him. "I wanted to see how it ended. That should have warned me." Do-hyun had always been a man who watched how things ended before deciding whether he was willing to stay for the beginning. For the next 4 months, he kept finding reasons to need me. A labor dispute in Incheon, a supplier bribery allegation, a rumor about a shipment that had crossed a border it should never have approached. Each time, I solved the crisis. Each time, Do-hyun stayed after everyone else left. Eventually, he stopped pretending he needed a crisis to see me. He asked different questions from other men. Not, "How did you learn to do this?" which usually meant, "How did a woman like you become smarter than I expected?" He asked, "What do you see that the rest of us miss?" And when I answered, he listened as if my mind was the most important thing in the room. For a while, it was. That is what made the later years so difficult to explain. This was not a man who began cruel. This was a man who began attentive and slowly became comfortable. And comfort can erode love more quietly than hatred ever could. We married 11 months later. My mother thought it was too fast. My instincts thought it was too fast. But I had mistaken intensity for certainty, and Do-hyun had mistaken being fascinated by me for knowing how to value me once fascination became familiar. The wedding was private by Kang standards, only 200 guests, a cathedral of white orchids, and enough security outside the estate to protect a head of state. His mother, Madame Kang, kissed both my cheeks and told me she hoped I understood that marrying into their family required discipline, discretion, and gratitude. I smiled. "I have always been disciplined," I told her, "and I am grateful when gratitude is earned." Her expression did not change. But from that day forward, she watched me as though I were an unfamiliar piece of furniture someone had placed in the center of her home. 3 months into the marriage, I discovered the first lie. Do-hyun had told me he was traveling to Macau for shipping negotiations. He had actually gone to meet Yoo-jin Baek. Yoo-jin was elegant, polished, Korean old money, and approved by every relative who had looked at me and wondered how long Do-hyun's rebellion would last. She had once been informally promised to him before he met me. His mother still treated that old arrangement like a door she refused to close. When I confronted him, Do-hyun did not deny the meeting. "My mother arranged it," he said. "She wanted to discuss whether Yoo-jin should return to the company." "Why did you lie?" "Because you would misunderstand. You met a woman your mother still wants you to marry, in another country, and your concern is that I might misunderstand?" His jaw tightened. "It was business. Do you love her?" "No." "Did you tell her that?" He paused. That pause was forgiveness number 1. I did not call it that. I called it grace. I told myself a man who came home, and eventually admitted the truth, was a man worth building with. 3 weeks later, Yoo-jin returned to the Kang Group. By the end of the quarter, she had an executive title. By the end of the year, she sat 2 seats away from my husband at every board meeting. I forgave him again. By number 12, I called it keeping the peace. By number 30, I had stopped naming it anything at all. The betrayals were rarely dramatic enough to justify a public reaction. That was their power. Each one was small enough that objecting would have made me look unreasonable. His mother moved my belongings out of the master suite while I was overseas handling a client. The staff told me the room required renovation before a family gathering. My clothes were placed in a smaller bedroom down the hall. The renovation lasted 8 months. Do-hyun never asked why I was no longer sleeping beside him. When I finally moved back on my own, he looked around the room and said, almost casually, "I thought you preferred the guest suite." I forgave him. At a charity gala, he introduced me to a group of international investors. "This is my wife, Halle. She does something in communications. Something." I had spent the previous 6 weeks secretly preventing one of his pharmaceutical subsidiaries from becoming the subject of a criminal inquiry. The board had praised the ghost's intervention that same morning. Do-hyun thanked an invisible stranger and reduced his wife to a hobby in the same day. I forgave him. When my father died, Do-hyun sent flowers instead of himself because the third quarter board vote could not be moved. 3 days later, he boarded a private jet for a golf weekend with investors whose meeting could easily have waited. I stood in a funeral home 2 continents away, holding my mother's hand while she asked whether I was happy. I said yes. Some lies feel kinder than the truth when spoken beside a coffin. I forgave him. At Christmas, Madame Kang seated Yoo-jin beside Do-hyun and placed me at the far end of a 20-person table, below distant cousins and beside a man who discussed golf handicaps for 2 hours. Photographs from that dinner made Yoo-jin look like the woman beside the heir. I looked like a guest. Do-hyun never noticed. I forgave him. When his mother told a room full of guests, she still prayed her son would find the correct woman eventually. Do-hyun laughed. Only for a second. Then he saw my face and stopped. That second became forgiveness number 47. When I discovered an appointment with divorce counsel on a shared calendar, he said he had only wanted to understand his options. I had been traveling frequently for the ghost's work and could not explain where I disappeared to for days at a time. He had never asked. He went to a lawyer before asking his own wife what she was carrying. I was afraid, he said. I forgave him because believing fear was easier than accepting intention. Forgiveness number 63. Small mercy after small mercy, I built an entire architecture of forgiveness and then moved inside it. That is the danger. One day, the structure meant to preserve your marriage becomes the prison preventing you from admitting there is no marriage left to preserve. Through all of it, the ghost kept working. The irony would have been funny if it had not cost me so much. When a director in the pharmaceutical division falsified safety reports, I created the voluntary disclosure strategy that prevented a federal investigation. When Do-hyun's father gave an arrogant interview that nearly exposed the family's earliest ties to the criminal side of the shipping trade, I built the counter-narrative that transformed an exposé into a triumphant profile about discipline and legitimacy. When shareholders nearly removed Do-hyun after a failed acquisition, I designed the recovery campaign, now taught in business schools under the name of an anonymous consultancy. I wrote it at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning while my husband slept upstairs. The next week, he thanked the legal department during a shareholder meeting. I watched from the back. I said nothing. I told myself I did not need recognition. That was partly true. What I needed was to matter beyond my usefulness. There is a difference. One afternoon, that difference finally spoke aloud. I had entered the Kang headquarters for a foundation meeting when I heard Yoo-jin presenting in a glass conference room. She was pitching a new reputation strategy for the shipping division. The proposal used language I recognized immediately because most of it had been copied from a confidential framework the ghost had submitted to the board 6 months earlier. She had changed the headings, not the thinking. When the meeting ended, she found me waiting near the elevators. "You attended the foundation meeting?" she asked. "Yes." She glanced at the folder in my hand. "Do-hyun says you used to work in public relations. Crisis strategy. Similar enough." "No," I said, "it is not." Her smile tightened. "I suppose it must be difficult, watching him build something this large when your own work is more supporting." "Supporting? You help people communicate. Do-hyun creates the decisions worth communicating." I looked through the glass wall at the presentation she had just delivered using my language. "Is that what you believe?" "It is what everyone believes." The elevator arrived. Before stepping inside, she added, "Some women are meant to stand beside power, Halle. Others are valuable because they make power look better." The doors closed between us. That evening, the board emailed the ghost praising Yoo-jin's innovative presentation and asking whether the anonymous consultant could help refine it. I refined my own stolen work. Then I invoiced them 3 times the normal rate. Forgiveness number 71. Do-hyun was never violent. He never shouted. He never called me names. To outsiders, he looked devoted. He brought coffee in the mornings. He remembered my mother's birthday. He rested his hand at the small of my back during photographs. But devotion that appears only when someone is watching is not devotion. It is choreography. And I had spent 6 years learning the dance so well that I forgot I was allowed to leave the stage. The 100th betrayal happened at the Kang Group's annual Legacy Gala. The event celebrated the shipping contract that had first made the family wealthy 3 generations earlier. 300 guests filled a gold ballroom beneath crystal chandeliers. Board members, government officials, investors, people whose legitimate titles concealed less legitimate loyalties. I wore ivory. I chose it because ivory photographs like peace, like composure, like a woman who has nothing to prove. Do-hyun stood beside me in black. For the cameras, we looked untouchable. His mother approached the microphone for the annual toast. To the Kang Group, she began, lifting her champagne. The guests raised their glasses. To the discipline that carried this family through 3 generations, another pause. And to my son, Do-hyun, and the woman I have always believed was meant to stand beside him in this family's next chapter. Her glass turned toward Yoo-jin. The room did not gasp. That was the worst part. No one appeared surprised. Yoo-jin lowered her eyes with practiced modesty. A photographer raised his camera. The flash captured Madame Kang's glass, pointed toward Yoo-jin while I stood beside her son, like a decorative mistake no one had corrected. Do-hyun's hand rested against my back. He knew it was wrong. I felt the slight tightening of his fingers. I watched his jaw tense. For 1 second, he considered speaking. Then he looked at the board members, the cameras, his mother, and the investors. He calculated the price of courage. And once again, he chose comfort. He remained silent. Director O, an elderly board member who had known the family for 30 years, leaned toward me. "Do not let it wound you too deeply," he murmured. "These things settle themselves in time." I smiled. "Things do not settle themselves, Director O. People settle them. Or they let them rot." Do-hyun's silence was forgiveness number 100. Except this time, I did not forgive him. I finished my champagne. I smiled for the final photographs. I allowed my husband to walk me to the car as though nothing had happened. And somewhere between the ballroom doors and the black vehicle waiting outside, the count inside my chest became strangely quiet. Not because the pain disappeared, because the decision had arrived. I did not leave the next morning. This was not an impulsive exit. I had spent 4 years solving other people's crises. For the first time, I applied that discipline to my own life. For 9 days, I behaved exactly as expected. I attended breakfast. I answered Madame Kang politely. I allowed Do-hyun to kiss my forehead before leaving for work. I attended a foundation meeting with women who had no idea the social order they worshipped was about to collapse. And beneath that performance, I dismantled my connection to the Kang Empire. I called my private bank in Singapore. The consulting entity known as Solvent Bridge Partners held 4 years of intellectual property, settlement arrangements, confidential media retainers, regulatory contacts, and crisis frameworks. All of it belonged to me. Not the Kang Group. Me. I terminated the family's access. I moved the entity's funds. I revoked emergency authority. I notified the lawyers maintaining the dormant agreements that every future request from the Kang Group required direct written approval from Halle Ashcroft. Not Halle Kang, Halle Ashcroft. I called Jae-won, Do-hyun's cousin and chief operating officer. He was the only person inside the family who had consistently treated me as though I possessed a mind. In 10 days, I told him, the Busan customs file will return. What do you know? Enough to tell you not to let the board dismiss it when it does. Who are you protecting? For once, myself. Then I called Odera. She had been my closest friend since college and had spent 6 years asking the same quiet question. When do you stop performing peace and start choosing it? Now, I told her. I am choosing it now. Those 9 days taught me that grief and planning can live inside the same body. Every morning, I mourned the man I had married. Every afternoon, I removed another piece of myself from his empire. Every night, I drafted the letter I would leave behind. The first version was 4 pages. The second was 2. The final version contained 2 sentences. Crisis work had taught me that the message remembered longest is usually the one with the fewest words. On the 7th evening, Madame Kang invited me to tea. She had never invited me alone in 6 years. We sat across from each other beneath an old portrait of Do-hyun's grandfather. I hope you understood the toast was not personal, she said. It was practical. Yoo-jin represents a certain continuity the family requires. Of course, I said. You have always been very sensible. I understand practicality better than you think. She smiled, relieved. She would understand exactly what I meant within 2 weeks. On the 10th morning, I packed one suitcase. Not the monogrammed luggage bearing the Kang name. A plain black case I had kept in storage. Some part of me had been preparing for departure long before I consciously gave myself permission to leave. I placed my wedding ring on the nightstand. It had belonged to Do-hyun's grandmother. Like everything else in that house, it had been loaned to me with the expectation that my place remained conditional. I wrote the letter at the kitchen counter where Do-hyun had confessed the Macau lie 6 years earlier. It read, "You forgave yourself 99 times for choosing everyone but me. I am done being your 100th chance." At 6 in the morning, before the staff woke, I walked out of the Kang residence. No confrontation. No final argument. No warning. I vanished. Here is what an empire looks like when the woman quietly holding it together stops answering the phone. On day 1, the board attempted to contact the ghost about an urgent customs inquiry. No response. On day 2, the emergency number connected to nothing. On day 3, legal counsel discovered that solvent bridge partners had terminated every Kang retainer simultaneously. On day 4, the Busan customs file reopened. The investigation had remained dormant for 2 years because of settlement structures I had personally negotiated. Without the ghost maintaining them, regulators requested documents the shipping subsidiary could not explain cleanly. On day 5, a reporter published the first article. On day 6, Kang Group stock fell 9%. On day 7, it dropped another 12%. On day 8, 2 shareholders demanded an emergency meeting. By day 11, the empire was no longer facing a crisis. It was facing the revelation that its survival had depended on someone none of them had bothered to know. The board meeting began at 8 in the morning. Jae-won later told me exactly how it unfolded. Director Oh demanded to know why the ghost could not be reached. The legal team explained that the ghost's consultancy had withdrawn. Madam Kang insisted they hire another firm. 3 firms declined after reviewing the complexity of the files. A 4th agreed, then withdrew after discovering that the previous consultant had controlled 4 years of institutional knowledge. No outsider could reconstruct quickly. Yoo Jin volunteered to lead the response. She stood at the front of the boardroom and presented the same polished confidence she had used when dismissing my career. Within 15 minutes, the directors understood she had no idea what she was doing. She recommended denying an allegation already acknowledged in an earlier confidential settlement. She proposed attacking a journalist whose unpublished evidence I had spent 2 years carefully monitoring. She cited the ghost's old framework without realizing the framework had been designed for a different regulatory environment. Director Oh interrupted her. "Were you not responsible for the communications strategy presented last quarter?" "Yes." "Then why can you not explain how it connects to the current crisis?" Yoo Jin looked toward Do-hyun. He did not rescue her. For once, silence worked against the woman his mother had chosen. That afternoon, journalist Priya Ose published the article that changed everything. The Woman Behind the Curtain. How an anonymous fixer saved a shipping dynasty 4 times, then walked away. Priya did not name me in the first article. She did not need to. She identified the pattern. Every major Kang scandal over 4 years had been resolved by the same invisible entity. Every retainer had ended on the day the CEO's wife disappeared from public life. The internet connected the remaining facts within 48 hours. Old photographs resurfaced. My employment history. My crisis work before marriage. Corporate registrations leading from Singapore shells back to trusts carrying the Ashcroft name. By the 13th day, the secret was no longer secret. The ghost was Halle Ashcroft. The wife Do-hyun introduced as someone who did something in communications. The black woman Madam Kang seated at the far end of the family table. The woman Yoo Jin had described as useful only because she made power look better. The empire had not survived despite me. It had survived because of me. Yoo Jin resigned 14 days after I left. Not because anyone forced her. Because investors who once viewed her as the natural future of the Kang Group now saw a woman who had spent years positioning herself beside power without learning how to protect it. Madam Kang faced the board 3 days later. For the first time in 40 years, no one softened their questions out of respect for her age or family name. Who was running the company's crisis strategy? One director demanded. She had no answer. Why was she never acknowledged? No answer. Why did you publicly endorse another woman beside your son while the actual architect of this company's survival stood in the room? Silence. The same weapon she had used against me for 6 years finally turned in her direction. Do-hyun spent the first week calling numbers I had already disconnected. He searched the city apartment we had lived in during the first happy year of our marriage. He stood there 3 separate times, waiting as if I might emerge from the silence if he remained long enough. He asked the household staff when I had left. No one knew. The woman who had spent 6 years being watched, managed, seated, photographed, corrected, and underestimated had walked out without one person noticing. On the 16th day, Do-hyun opened a drawer in his study, a drawer he had never examined. Inside were copies of every crisis file I had handled for the Kang Group, Busan Customs, the pharmaceutical safety investigation, the shareholder revolt, his father's interview, the Incheon labor scandal. Every file carried the ghost's code. Every margin carried my handwriting. He read through the night. Near dawn, he found a note I had written during the crisis created by his father's interview. He will never know how close this came. That is fine. It is not for him to know. It is for the company to survive. Jae-won found him still sitting there at sunrise. Do-hyun asked one question. Did she ever let me see her the way I am seeing her now? Jae-won gave him the only honest answer. No, because you never asked. I did not disappear because I stopped loving Do-hyun. I disappeared because I finally understood that love without recognition is not a marriage. It is unpaid labor with no exit interview. For 7 weeks, I stayed with Odira in a coastal town 2 hours from Seoul. The house sat above a quiet stretch of water where no one recognized the Kang name and no one expected me to smile. For the first 3 weeks, I barely slept. Silence feels frightening when you have spent years performing peace for other people. Each morning, Odira brought coffee to the porch. You do not have to know what comes next today, she would say. You only have to know you are not returning to what came before. By the 4th week, I began accepting work again. Not from the Kang Group. From 2 clients that had retained the ghost independently for years. The work felt different when it was no longer supporting a marriage that treated my competence like background noise. It felt like mine. 7 weeks after I left, Do-hyun found me. A private investigator traced one of Odira's rental payments. He arrived at sunset wearing a suit that no longer seemed to fit him. He had lost weight. His face carried the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent weeks discovering that the life he controlled had been built around things he never bothered to understand. I met him on the porch. He did not attempt to touch me. I know what you did for us, he said. For the company. For all of us. You know now. Yes, that is different from knowing me when it mattered. He looked toward the water. I do not know how to hold the fact that you saved us for 4 years, and I never knew. You do not have to hold it. I did not need you to understand every file. I needed you to understand your wife. I thought I did. You knew what I tolerated. You knew what I fixed. You knew I always came back. That is not the same as knowing me. He lowered his eyes. My mother once asked why I never feared losing you. I told her it was because you always returned. And now? Now I understand that confidence was not love. It was entitlement. The word surprised me. Not because it was wrong, because it was accurate. I should have spoken at the gala, he said. You should have spoken long before the gala. I know. Recognition is not restoration, Do-hyun. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means understanding what you lost does not automatically return it to you. His face tightened, but he nodded. That mattered. The old Do-hyun would have argued. The man on the porch accepted the boundary without turning his regret into another demand I had to manage. He asked me to return to Seoul, not to the house, to meet the board. They want to offer the ghost a permanent executive position, he said. Equity, public recognition, a seat. The ghost does not exist anymore. They want you. I almost laughed. They wanted the ghost when she was invisible. They ignored Halle when she was standing beside them. I know. No. You know now. He handed me a letter from his mother. I read it after he left. Madam Kang addressed me by my full name for the first time in 6 years. Halle Ashcroft. She wrote that she had spent 40 years believing a woman's value in the Kang family was measured by her willingness to disappear gracefully into its needs. Watching me actually disappear had taught her what those needs had cost. She admitted that the toast at the gala was not merely practical, it was cruel. She admitted she had elevated Yoo-jin because Yoo-jin reflected the kind of woman she had been trained to respect, while I represented a form of authority she had never learned to recognize. She did not ask me to forgive her. She asked me to tell her if the day ever came when I believed she had earned it. I have not told her yet. Some apologies begin a process. They do not complete one. I agreed to meet the board. On my terms. I entered the Kang headquarters wearing a charcoal suit and my own name. No ivory, no wedding ring, no place 2 seats behind my husband. When I walked into the boardroom, Director O rose halfway from his chair before catching himself. Perhaps his body understood the new power structure before his pride did. The entire board was present. Do-hyun sat at the side of the table, not at the head. That seat remained empty for me. I did not sit immediately. My terms are simple, I said. No one interrupted. Equity, not a retainer. My name on every agreement, not a shell corporation designed to keep me invisible. Independent authority over all crisis decisions. Full disclosure access across every Kang subsidiary. The power to reject assignments that violate legal or ethical boundaries. And a permanent board seat that does not depend on my marriage. Director O cleared his throat. What percentage? I named it. 2 board members exchanged looks. I closed the folder. You lost more than that in the first 6 days after I stopped working. No one argued again. Every term passed unanimously. Solvent bridge partners ceased to exist. I renamed the company Ashcroft Standing. Every major Kang contract now carries that name at the top of the page. Bold. Unmissable. The empire that once introduced me as someone who did something in communications cannot sign a major agreement without acknowledging the woman who keeps it standing. But I did not return to Do-hyun. That distinction matters. He apologized. He changed parts of his behavior. He confronted his mother publicly. He removed Yoo-jin from every remaining advisory role. He began therapy without asking whether doing so would persuade me to come home. Those actions mattered. They did not erase 6 years. Regret is not restoration. Recognition is not reconciliation. And a man does not regain a marriage merely because he finally understands the labor he failed to value. Do-hyun and I speak now, mostly about business, sometimes about ordinary things. He asks before assuming. He listens without turning every conversation toward what he wants back. I do not know what our relationship will become, but I know what it will never become again. I will never return to the smaller room. I will never sit at the far end of the table and call it peace. I will never accept public devotion from a man who practices private cowardice. And I will never again confuse my ability to endure something with an obligation to keep enduring it. Madam Kang sends me a card each year on the anniversary of the day I left. The first one said, "I once believed your disappearance destroyed this family. I understand now it revealed it." I kept the card. I did not answer. Not yet. People ask whether I regret forgiving Do-hyun 99 times. For a while, I did. Now I understand those years taught me the exact shape of my patience. They taught me what silence weighs. They taught me how slowly a woman can disappear while remaining physically present in every room. And eventually, they taught me the unmistakable feeling of reaching the edge. I think about the woman I was at that final gala, standing in ivory, smiling while a ballroom erased her, finishing her champagne as if she had not just been publicly replaced. I do not pity her anymore. I am proud of her. She was already 10 days away from choosing herself. She simply needed one final moment to stop calling exhaustion grace. Somewhere, another woman is on forgiveness number 40, or 60, or 88. She is still finding softer words for what is happening because the true words would require a decision she is not ready to make. I will not tell her when to leave. No one could have told me, but I will tell her this. The count remains real even when you stop saying the number aloud. It stays folded behind your ribs. It gets heavier each time you rename betrayal as patience, neglect as pressure, and cowardice as complexity. You will recognize your 100th time when it arrives, not because someone else points it out, Because the part of you that has spent years folding the pain smaller will finally refuse to fold again. I forgave Kang Do-hyun 99 times for choosing everyone but me. On the 100th, I did not punish him. I did not expose him out of rage. I did not burn his empire down. I simply stopped being the invisible woman holding it up. That was enough. The investigations returned. The shareholders revolted. The board panicked. The woman chosen to replace me discovered that standing beside power and sustaining it were not the same thing. And the man who believed I would always come back finally learned that forgiveness is not an unlimited resource. I vanished. His empire fell apart. And when I returned, I did not return as his wife begging to be seen. I returned as Halle Ashcroft, the woman whose name should have been on the door the entire time. The 100th betrayal did not destroy me. It ended the version of me willing to disappear inside someone else's life. And for the first time in 6 years, I chose myself before anyone else had the chance to choose against me.